Hi everybody, my name is Maddie. Welcome to the Diversify Our Narrative YouTube channel. In today's video, we're going to be doing a deep dive into accessibility rights and ableism, along with touching on ableism in the COVID-19 pandemic. So first, I'm going to start by sharing some facts, statistics, all of those kind of things on disability. So first, I'm going to start off with some global statistics from the World Health Organization. Roughly 15% of people in the world are disabled. Roughly 50% of disabled people can't afford healthcare in comparison to 1/3 of non-disabled people. And also, disabled people are 3 times more likely to be denied healthcare. There's also a lower employment rate for disabled people. For disabled men, the employment rate is 53% in comparison to 65% for non-disabled men. And for women, the employment rate for disabled women is 20% and the employment rate for non-disabled women is 30%. And also, disabled people are more vulnerable to poverty. Now I'm going to share some statistics that are specific to the United States from the Center of Disease Control.gov. Roughly 1/4 or 26% of adults in the US are disabled, and 25% of adult women are disabled. Also, 40% of adults 65 and up are disabled, and also 1/3 of disabled adults in the age range of 18 to 44 years old don't have a usual healthcare provider. Also, under the Fair Labor Standards Act, it's legal to pay disabled people under the minimum wage if they aren't able to reach their full productive capacity in certain types of jobs such as retail. Now, a lot of these statistics in fact mentioned stem from something called ableism. Now, you're probably wondering, what is ableism? According to the Merriam-Webster Online Dictionary, ableism is defined as discrimination or prejudice against individuals with disabilities. It's also important to note that while the textbook definition of ableism is correct and applicable, there's many other ways you can define ableism in a more detailed manner. Now I'm going to talk about some types of ableism. Now, one type of ableism is personal ableism, which is ableism that is done on an individual level. Some examples of that include being uncomfortable around disabled people, looking at them in disgust, or refusing to talk to them. Thinking of disabled people in a stereotypical manner in ways such as thinking mentally ill people are dangerous or erratic or unpredictable, or assuming that disabled people don't have multi-phase personalities. And another form of personal ableism is envying disabled people for their privileges, such as thinking, disabled people have such good parking spots, or disabled students get so much more time on tests, why don't we get that? Things like that. Now that we've touched on some examples of personal ableism, now let's talk about systemic ableism. Systemic ableism is not necessarily on an individual level, but on an institutional level by systemic forces. Some examples are, but not limited to, regulations or laws that don't allow equality and freedom for disabled people. For example, Social Security Disability and SSI putting disabled people at risk simply for making a certain amount of money or getting married. Since if they were to do one or both of those things, they might lose their assistance and accommodations and benefits. Another form of systemic ableism is practices and policies that attempt to eliminate disability. For example, eugenics, which is the idea of controlling who is allowed to live or reproduce, which essentially, to put it very simply, eugenics was a way of killing disabled people in attempts to get rid of them from society. These people wanted to stop the spread of disability, which is obviously horrible, incredibly ableist. Other examples of ableism include, but are not limited to, buildings being inaccessible, for example, not having wheelchair ramp, or not having elevators, or not having braille on signs, mocking people's disabilities, / using terminology that can be belittling for people with disabilities. For example, saying things like, the weather is so bipolar, or I'm so OCD. Also, inspiration porn, which inspiration porn is framing disabled people as inspirational for doing everyday things. Another form of ableism is speaking to disabled adults in a childlike way, or speaking on behalf of disabled people without their permission. Now, let's talk about ableism during the COVID-19 pandemic. Of course, ableism has been an issue for an incredibly long time, but it has become much more prevalent during the COVID-19 pandemic. There have been many times where disabled people have been denied access to life-saving medical treatment for COVID-19, since some healthcare providers think that disabled people aren't worthy of getting it because they have a lower quality of life, which is absolutely not true. Disabled people need to get that life-saving treatment since they deserve to live just like everyone else. Another form of ableism that has happened in the COVID-19 pandemic is people not caring to follow COVID guidelines, thinking it won't really affect them or it won't really affect people, and dismissing how many disabled people, including the elderly and also people of all ages who are disabled, who have certain health conditions, etc., that put them at higher risk, and just ignoring the lives of those people and just acting as if, they don't matter. Also, it took a long time for many disabled people to get the financial assistance they needed in the pandemic, and also, depending on where you live, there's some places that didn't consider disabled people high priority for the COVID-19 vaccine. Now let's talk about how we can stop and combat ableism and the importance of it all. In terms of combating ableism, it's incredibly crucial that we educate ourselves on ableism along with holding ourselves accountable for any ableist biases or actions, and along with holding others accountable for their ableist actions, beliefs, thoughts, biases, etc. And of course that is the bare minimum. We have to go beyond that. It's extremely important to learn about ableism in order to be an ally to the disabled community and standing with, but of course not standing over or stepping over the community. And of course it's important to make sure their voices are heard. And furthermore, by being an ally to the disabled community, we can collectively push for a more accessible and inclusive environment. Disabled people will have their needs met and their voices heard. Now let's talk about accessibility rights. What are they and how do they help disabled people? Accessibility rights, also known as disability rights, are rights that ensure that disabled people have their legal needs met. For example, you may have heard of the ADA, also known as the Americans with Disabilities Act. Now you're probably wondering, what is the ADA? According to ADA.gov, the ADA prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability in employment, state and local government, public accommodation, commercial facilities, transportation, and telecommunications. It also applies to the United States Congress. Other acts along with the ADA that help contribute to accessibility rights include, but are not limited to, the Telecommunications Act, which ensures that telecommunications services are accessible to disabled people, the Fair Housing Act, which ensures that reasonable exceptions can be made for disabled people so they can have equal housing opportunities. For example, if there's a no pet rule in an apartment complex, a blind person can have a guide dog stay with them since that is a necessity for them. Or another example would be disabled people would be allowed to make modifications to their apartment to make it more accessible for them. Another act that contributes to accessibility rights is the Air Carrier Access Act, and this prohibits discrimination towards individuals with physical and/or mental impairment. Also, voting rights are also another key thing in accessibility rights. Polling places must be accessible for disabled people, and disabled people also have the right to seek assistance with voting, but also have the right to vote on their own without any assistance. Now let's talk about why are accessibility rights so important to learn about. Did you know that the ADA was passed only a little over 30 years ago? Seems like a short amount of time ago, doesn't it? This means that in the United States, only some people were born into a time where if they were disabled, they had their rights protected by acts like the ADA. People who were born before 1990 lived at least part of their life with the risk of legally being denied services such as education, employment, transportation, etc. And even though it's great that the ADA was passed in 1990 and now disabled people in the US are legally protected, it's important to note that that's not the case for everybody. And so furthermore, it's really important that we all fight for accessibility rights. But that way, we can live in a world where all disabled people can be ensured that their rights will be legally protected. And remember, disabled rights are human rights. Now that you've learned more about accessibility rights, ableism, and the importance in fighting for justice for disabled people and their rights, I hope you continue to open your eyes and help disabled people achieve justice at the Diversify Our Narrative Youth Empowerment Conference, where there will be a panel on accessibility rights specifically titled Justice for All. What are accessibility rights? Thank you!